The alarm clock buzzed at 6 a.m. Michael silenced it with a single, practiced motion before his eyes were even fully open. He swung his feet to the floor, moved through the bathroom, and stepped into the flow of morning traffic. By 8:30 a.m., he was at his desk. The day began not with a greeting, but with the rapid, rhythmic click of incoming emails. Deadlines stacked up like heavy stone blocks. He spent his hours navigating a labyrinth of client demands and shifting project requirements. When problems surfaced, the rest of the team pushed their chairs back and retreated to the break room. Michael remained. He stayed to scrub the errors from the spreadsheets. He stayed to absorb the frustration of the clients. He was the one who logged out last, every single night, while the office lights dimmed to a dull, empty hum. To the colleagues around him, he was just another face in the crowd, a fixture of the office as common as the fluorescent hum overhead. He was a project manager on paper, but in reality, he was the person who caught everything that slipped through the cracks. He processed the data, he managed the fallout, and he did it all in silence, while the world moved past him without a second glance. The clock on the wall flickered past 8 p.m. The office was a tomb of empty cubicles and flickering monitors. Michael rubbed his eyes, the skin around them tight from staring at columns of numbers for 12 consecutive hours. He stood up, his spine popping in the silence. He reached for his bag, but his hand stopped. Resting in the center of his workspace was a book. Its edges were soft, the cover worn thin by time and use. He had not left it there. He sat back down, the chair groaning under his weight, and pulled the object closer. He flipped through the pages. The paper felt heavy, textured. He stopped at a page marked with a dried, pressed leaf. The ink was dark and deliberate. The text read, "The man who does more than he is paid for will soon be paid for more than he does." He read it once, then he read it again. He traced the letters with his index finger. The rhythm of his breathing changed. He looked around the empty office, then back at the ink on the page. For the first time in years, the crushing weight of the day did not feel like a burden. It felt like a foundation. The next morning, the office felt different to Michael. He walked to his desk and sat down without checking his messages for guidance. When the phone rang, it was a client, voice sharp with agitation over a stalled project. In the past, Michael would have looked for a supervisor. Instead, he pulled a notepad toward him. He listened, took notes, and then spoke. He outlined a new strategy, point by point, cutting through the hesitation that usually defined their calls. When the call ended, he did not wait for approval. He opened the file, reorganized the data, and began drafting a new presentation from scratch. He skipped his lunch break, his fingers moving across the keyboard until the screen glare blurred. He refined every slide, ensuring the logic was airtight and the projections were precise. By late afternoon, his colleagues noticed the change. They watched him work, but he did not offer explanations or seek their input. He kept his head down, his focus entirely on the output. He stayed 2 hours past his scheduled departure, the office lights reflecting off his monitor as he finalized the proposal. He was no longer waiting for instructions. He was building the road forward. Weeks turned into months of steady, rhythmic effort. Lunch hours became a ritual of contrast for Michael. His colleagues gathered in the break room, their voices rising in a chorus of complaints about management, low pay, and shifting deadlines. Michael sat at his desk, his chair pushed in, his eyes locked on the work before him. He did not join the conversation. He did not offer nods of agreement or sighs of frustration. He stayed silent. He viewed his desk not as a workstation, but as a training gym. Every document that required deep analysis was a heavy plate on a barbell. Every complex report was a set of repetitions designed to test his limits. He treated the weight of responsibility like a physical load, lifting it to build his own endurance and skill. When the office hummed with gossip, he tuned it out, focusing instead on the friction of the keyboard and the precise flow of his data. He was not just clearing his task list, he was hardening his resolve. He pushed through the fatigue, testing his capacity to hold more, do more, and solve more. Each hour spent in this deliberate isolation was a muscle fiber torn and rebuilt, forging a resilience that his peers could not see, but which began to define every movement he made. The atmosphere in the office underwent a subtle, undeniable shift. It began on a Tuesday morning when the internal server crashed, cutting off access to all client files. Panic rippled through the cubicles. Without a second thought, the team members stood up and walked toward Michael's desk, their expressions tight with expectation. He did not look up from his screen, but he took the lead, coordinating the restart and restoring connectivity within minutes. The next week, when the firm faced a sudden budget cut, the director bypassed the department heads entirely. He walked straight to Michael's office, a thick folder of financial reports in his hand. They spent an hour behind closed doors, reviewing projections and reallocating resources until the deficit was erased. The office staff watched these interactions with growing clarity. When a printer jammed, a colleague shouted Michael's name. When a client threatened to cancel, the account manager looked to him for the final word. Michael had become the gravity around which the entire department orbited. He was the first person they consulted and the final person they trusted. He occupied his space with a quiet, persistent authority, holding the structure of the company together through every technical failure and administrative tremor. He was no longer just a manager. He was the anchor. The descent began at 3 in the afternoon. A massive project, the cornerstone of the firm's quarterly goals, faced total collapse. Data streams turned red, error codes flooded the monitors, and the final deadline loomed less than 12 hours away. The phone started ringing in rapid, jagged bursts. The lead client was on the line, his voice cutting through the office floor, threatening to walk away and take the contract with him. Panic hit the room like a physical wave. Colleagues scrambled, their movements frantic and uncoordinated. Some stared at their screens with hollow eyes, while others began shutting down their computers, the soft clicks of hardware powering off sounding like a retreat. The director paced the hallway, his face drained of color, unable to offer a solution. Every desk was a hub of confusion. The air felt heavy, stagnant with the scent of stale coffee and the palpable vibration of defeat. People began grabbing their bags, avoiding eye contact, and heading for the elevators. The project was dead, and the office knew it. The silence of the abandoned cubicles grew louder than the shouting, creating a suffocating vacuum of certainty that the end had arrived. Michael watched the last elevator door slide shut. The office was empty, save for the rhythmic hum of the ventilation system. He stood up, walked to his desk, and pushed aside the stacks of useless paperwork. He cleared the surface until only his terminal and a blank notepad remained. He sat back down and opened the primary data file. It was a chaotic web of errors and broken links. He did not look at the clock. He did not check his phone. He began to map the data, tracing each failure back to its source with surgical precision. The first hour passed in absolute silence. He moved from the server logs to the transaction history, highlighting discrepancies that others had missed in their panic. His fingers tapped against the keyboard, a steady, relentless cadence that filled the room. He drank a cup of cold coffee, set the mug aside, and continued to rewrite the core strategy. By midnight, he had reconstructed the missing nodes. By 2 in the morning, he had stabilized the project architecture. He was alone, surrounded by the glow of 3 monitors, methodically rebuilding a disaster that everyone else had abandoned. He did not stop to rest. He leaned into the work, his focus narrowing to the next line of code, the next equation, the next bridge to a solution. The first light of dawn grayed the windows, casting long, sharp shadows across the floor. Michael blinked, his eyes stinging from hours of glare, and checked the final simulation. The data held. He reached for the phone, his hands steady despite the exhaustion. He dialed the lead client's personal line. It rang twice before a tired, guarded voice answered. Michael did not hesitate. He laid out the new strategy, point by point, explaining the logic of the fix and the security of the new architecture. He spoke without apology or filler, focusing only on the numbers and the results. There was a long silence on the other end. He could hear the client breathing, the faint rustle of papers being shifted. Then, the client spoke, his tone shifting from suspicion to surprise. He asked for the specific metrics. Michael recited them. Another pause, then the client agreed to a digital review. 10 minutes later, the notification pinged on Michael's terminal. The renewal document was signed. The project was not just alive, it was stronger than before. Michael leaned back in his chair, the weight of the night finally lifting, and watched the city begin to stir outside the glass. A month later, the moving crew finished clearing the corner office. Michael stood in the center of the room. The space was expansive, overlooking the city skyline, with mahogany furniture and a private view of the harbor. He touched the polished surface of the oversized desk. It felt solid, yet strangely light. A human resources representative brought in the paperwork for his raise, the numbers on the page reflecting a level of compensation he had once thought impossible to reach. He signed the documents, the pen moving with the same steady rhythm he used for his reports. He walked to the floor-to-ceiling glass and looked down at the street. People were moving like ants in the morning rush, unaware of the quiet shift that had occurred behind these walls. He thought back to the nights spent in the dark, the data maps, and the pressure of the deadline. He realized then that the office, the view, and the salary were not the goal. They were merely the physical echoes of his own persistence. The wealth was a byproduct, a shadow cast by the work he had already done. He turned away from the window, back to the pile of new files waiting on his desk, and began to read. That evening, Michael sat at the kitchen table. The house was quiet, a stark contrast to the relentless pace of the office. His teenage son sat across from him, leaning forward, eyes fixed on him with a mix of curiosity and pride. "How did you do it?" his son asked, gesturing toward the news of the promotion he had seen earlier. Michael paused. He pushed his plate aside, creating space between them, and rested his forearms on the table. He looked his son in the eye. "I simply helped more people than was expected," he said. The words hung in the air, simple and heavy. He explained that true influence was not a matter of titles or public recognition. It was found in the quiet, consistent act of doing the work that others ignored. He spoke of the nights he stayed late, not for the reward, but because the task required a hand that would not pull away. He finished his meal, stood up, and carried the plates to the sink. He remained the same man he had always been. He walked back to the table, rested a hand on his son's shoulder, and smiled. Greatness was not a destination. It was the rhythm of showing up, day after day, and keeping every promise he made to himself and to others.